Billionaire's son failed every math test until the new black Maid taught him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The lights of the grand mansion were glowing under the soft evening sky as the family gathered for dinner in the spacious dining hall. The soft chime of fine crystal glasses clinking together echoed through the hall as the wealthy elite of Silicon Valley mingled and enjoyed their evening. But amidst the lavish decorations and expensive wine, there was one person who felt out of place, a young boy named Ethan, the son of a billionaire tech mogul. Despite the plush surroundings and the wealth surrounding him, Ethan's life was not as perfect as it seemed. He sat at a massive wooden table, his forehead furrowed in frustration, staring at a set of math problems in front of him. The numbers seemed to mock him. Ethan was the son of Richard Kessler, the CEO of one of the largest technology firms in the world, a company worth billions. His father had built an empire, and Ethan was expected to carry it on. But there was one problem. Ethan struggled with math. He had failed every single math test he had taken for the past year. No matter how much tutoring he received or how many hours he spent with private tutors, the numbers never seemed to add up. It was as if his mind couldn't grasp the concepts. The pressure from his father only made things worse. Richard Kessler had high expectations for his son. He wanted Ethan to be the next great leader in the tech world, to follow in his footsteps. But Ethan was beginning to fear he would never live up to the standards set for him. The dinner was in full swing, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was occupied by thoughts of his upcoming final math exam, one that his father insisted he would pass with flying colors, or there would be consequences. "You need to shape up, Ethan," Richard had said earlier that evening, his voice low and firm, "or you'll be wasting your potential, just like the others who couldn't cut it." As Ethan sat there, feeling the weight of his father's words, he heard a soft voice from behind him. "Would you like me to help you with that?" He turned around to see the new maid, a young black woman named Naomi, standing there with a gentle smile. Naomi had just started working for the Kessler family a few days ago. She was quiet, kept to herself, and worked diligently behind the scenes, tending to the needs of the house. No one had paid much attention to her until now. Naomi wasn't like the rest of the staff. She didn't flaunt herself or try to seek attention. She simply went about her work with grace and quiet confidence. Ethan, initially shocked that she even offered to help him, hesitated for a moment. "I don't need help," he muttered, his voice tinged with embarrassment. Naomi smiled softly. "You might be surprised." With nothing to lose, Ethan handed Naomi the paper. He had no faith that anyone, least of all the maid, could help him. But Naomi simply sat down beside him, and in a calm, reassuring voice, she began explaining the math problems. It wasn't just her words, but the way she explained each step, with patience and clarity, that made all the difference. It was as though the fog in Ethan's mind began to clear. He could suddenly see the patterns, the logic that had eluded him for so long. He could feel his confidence building as Naomi guided him through the process. The more she explained, the more Ethan realized that he hadn't been struggling with the material all along. It was the way it had been taught to him that made everything feel so complicated. Naomi's approach was different. It was not just about numbers and formulas. She made the concepts feel simple, even intuitive. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt hope. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of things, but it was a moment that would change everything for Ethan Kessler. Little did he know that the woman who had quietly entered his life to clean the mansion would become the key to unlocking his future. The next day, Ethan sat at his desk again, the same math problems in front of him. But this time, it was different. He felt a strange sense of calm as he stared at the paper. The frustration that had clouded his mind for so long had finally started to lift. Naomi's words echoed in his mind as he carefully worked through the first few problems. This time, the numbers didn't seem so overwhelming. It was as though everything had finally clicked into place. He solved the first problem, then the second, and the third. He was moving through the exercises with ease, something he hadn't experienced in months. The confidence Naomi had instilled in him was growing. Ethan couldn't believe it. Could he actually be learning this? He looked over at the clock. It was time for breakfast. Naomi had come by earlier to check on him, offering a small, encouraging smile as she left the room. But now, as he made his way downstairs, he noticed something different about the atmosphere in the house. The usual hustle and bustle of the Kessler family's morning routine was quieter. His father, Richard, was sitting at the table, his brow furrowed as he read the newspaper, and his mother was nowhere to be seen. Ethan, still feeling the excitement of his progress, approached the table cautiously. Richard looked up, his expression unchanged, but there was a certain coldness to his gaze. "How are the math problems going, son?" Richard asked, his voice as stern as ever. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had never been one to brag about his accomplishments. But today, there was something different about him. Something he wanted to share. "Actually, I think I'm getting the hang of it," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I've been working on them all morning, and they're starting to make sense." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's a surprise," he said, his tone laced with doubt. "Well, I'm glad to see you're finally putting in the effort." Ethan nodded, but as he took his seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that his father was still waiting for him to fail. Richard Kessler was a man who expected results, and anything less was considered unacceptable. As Ethan tried to enjoy his breakfast, the moment was interrupted by a loud ring of the doorbell. Naomi appeared in the doorway shortly after, looking as calm and collected as ever. Ethan noticed that his father's attention shifted the moment Naomi entered the room. Richard had a way of commanding attention without saying much, and as she entered, the atmosphere in the room became a little more tense. Naomi stepped forward, her eyes meeting Richard's for a brief moment before she spoke. "Good morning, Mr. Kessler," she said with a quiet respect. "I was wondering if you'd like me to assist with anything around the house today?" Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave her a long look, sizing her up, as if he were trying to gauge her worth. Naomi, however, remained unfazed. She simply stood there, waiting for his response. "I'm sure you have other duties to attend to," Richard finally said, his voice distant. "We'll be fine here." Naomi nodded and turned to leave, but as she did, she glanced back at Ethan. Her gaze held something unspoken. Encouragement, maybe, or perhaps a silent reminder of how far he had come. Ethan watched her as she left the room, her presence lingering in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Naomi wasn't just a maid. She was someone who saw something in him that no one else did. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by his father's voice once more. "You know, Ethan, you're still expected to perform well in school. I don't want to hear excuses. If you don't pull your weight, there's no future for you here." The harshness in his words stung, but Ethan had changed. He had seen the way Naomi had helped him, the way she had taken the time to teach him without judgment or expectation. And for the first time, Ethan realized something. It wasn't just about the math. It was about the people who took the time to help you when no one else would. He didn't want to disappoint Naomi. He didn't want to disappoint himself. Ethan sat up straighter, meeting his father's gaze. "I know, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to do my best. I promise." The words felt stronger than they ever had before. Ethan wasn't just working for his father's approval anymore. He was working for himself, and that made all the difference. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Ethan found himself in his study again, math problems spread out before him. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He had a new sense of purpose, and as Naomi's voice echoed in his mind, he knew that this was just the beginning. The young boy who had once failed every test was now on a path to something greater. And it was all thanks to a quiet, unassuming maid who had taught him that learning wasn't about being perfect. It was about persistence and the courage to keep going, no matter how hard it seemed. Ethan knew that he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right track. The following week, Ethan found himself in the study once again, but this time, something was different. He wasn't just solving math problems. He was actively engaging with them, piecing together the puzzles in front of him with a new sense of confidence. Naomi's lessons had opened his eyes to the beauty of learning, and now he found himself thinking about problems in a way he never had before. The concepts that once seemed impossible to grasp were now slowly becoming clear. It was no longer just about passing the test. It was about the thrill of understanding. As Ethan sat there, immersed in his work, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. He looked up to see his father standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Richard's face was as stern as ever, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that Ethan hadn't seen before. "How's it going, son?" Richard asked, his voice gruff. Ethan took a deep breath and pushed his notebook toward his father. "I'm actually getting it, Dad. I've been studying really hard." Richard raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise crossing his face. Ethan couldn't help but feel a small spark of pride. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to hide his progress from his father. He had worked hard for this moment, and it felt good to share it. Richard walked over to the desk and took a look at the problems Ethan had solved. The room was silent for a few moments, and Ethan waited anxiously, unsure of what his father would say. Richard finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're really getting the hang of it," he said, his tone softer than usual. "I didn't expect this." Ethan's heart raced, but he tried to keep his cool. "I'm doing my best," he said simply. Richard nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Good. Keep it up." The conversation was brief, but it felt like a victory to Ethan. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was in his father's shadow. He wasn't just doing this to meet someone else's expectations. He was doing it for himself. Later that evening, Ethan found himself at the dinner table with his family. The usual chatter filled the air, but there was something different in the atmosphere tonight. Ethan felt more confident, more at ease in his own skin. His progress in math had given him a sense of accomplishment that was hard to ignore. As they ate, Richard spoke up, his voice carrying across the table. "Ethan," he said, "I'm impressed with your progress. Keep it up, and we'll see where this takes you." Ethan nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The approval he had been craving for so long was finally within reach. Naomi, of course, was nowhere to be found at the dinner table. She had long since finished her work for the day, retreating back to her small quarters after another long day of cleaning and maintaining the house. But even though she was no longer in the room, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there with him in some way. She had given him the tools to succeed. She had taught him not just how to solve problems, but how to approach them with patience and determination. He owed her more than he could express in words. As the evening wore on, Ethan couldn't help but think back to the day when Naomi had first sat down with him, patiently explaining the math problems that had once seemed insurmountable. She had given him hope when he had none left, and now, for the first time, Ethan truly believed in his own abilities. Naomi's quiet strength had done more than just teach him math. It had given him a sense of self-worth that he had never experienced before. The next morning, Ethan sat at his desk again, ready to tackle the next set of problems. This time, he wasn't just doing it because his father expected it. He was doing it for himself. He was no longer the boy who had failed every test. He was someone who had learned the power of persistence and hard work. And that was a lesson that no one, not even his father, could take away from him. As the days passed, Ethan continued to make progress. Each test he took, each problem he solved, became a small victory in his journey. And as for Naomi, her quiet influence remained ever present in his life. She had shown him that with the right mindset, anything was possible. Ethan no longer saw her as just the maid. She was his mentor, his guide, and the one person who had believed in him when no one else did. And in that, Ethan found a new kind of strength, one that would carry him far beyond the classroom. Days passed, and the transformation in Ethan was becoming undeniable. His once dim view of school and his future had been replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Each day, he pored over his math problems with an intensity he had never known before. No longer was he simply working to meet the expectations of his father. He was working because he wanted to. He was driven by something deeper now, a quiet fire that had been ignited in him by someone who had never expected anything from him in return. Naomi. He still thought about the first day she had sat beside him, explaining the problems in such a way that made them seem simple, even when they were far from it. Naomi had given him the keys to unlocking his own potential, and for that, Ethan would forever be grateful. One afternoon, after school, Ethan decided to go to the library to work on his latest assignment. As he walked through the familiar halls of his mansion, he noticed a door at the end of the hallway slightly ajar. He paused for a moment, a feeling of curiosity bubbling up inside him. Slowly, he pushed the door open. Inside, He saw Naomi sitting at a small desk, her head bent low over a pile of papers. She was focused, lost in her work, and for a moment, Ethan simply stood there, watching her. It was hard for him to reconcile this woman, the quiet maid, the teacher, the one who had shown him the way, with the idea of the woman who had spent countless hours cleaning the mansion. Naomi was so much more than her role in the household, and Ethan was beginning to realize just how much he had underestimated her before. With a slight hesitation, Ethan stepped inside the room, his presence finally breaking Naomi's concentration. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. A brief flash of surprise crossed her face, but it quickly faded into her usual calm demeanor. "Ethan," Naomi said softly, her voice gentle but steady. "What can I do for you?" Ethan walked into the room, his gaze falling on the papers spread across the desk. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I know I haven't said it enough, but thank you for helping me." Naomi raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "There's no need for thanks, Ethan," she replied with a soft smile. "You did the work. I just helped you see it differently." Ethan shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You don't understand," he said, his voice more sincere than ever. "You gave me the confidence to keep going. You made me believe in myself when no one else did." Naomi's smile softened, and for a brief moment, she looked almost shy. "I'm just glad I could help," she said quietly, returning her focus to the papers in front of her. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, taking in the scene. There was something about Naomi, her quiet strength, her humility, that had changed him. She had never asked for anything in return, but in helping him, she had shown him more about life than anyone else ever had. As Ethan turned to leave, he felt a strange sense of peace. The mansion no longer felt like a place of cold wealth and high expectations. It felt like home, a place where he was free to be himself, to learn, and to grow. Later that evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Richard Kessler turned his attention to Ethan. "I've been hearing some good things about your progress, son," Richard said, his voice as composed as always. "Keep it up, and you'll be back on track in no time." Ethan nodded, his expression neutral. He could feel his father's gaze, the scrutiny that came with being the heir to one of the largest tech companies in the world. But for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel the weight of his father's expectations. He wasn't working for approval anymore. He was working for himself. As the evening wore on, Richard spoke again, this time with a touch more warmth in his voice. "You know, I've been hard on you, Ethan," Richard said, looking his son in the eye. "But I see the effort you're putting in. Don't stop now. I'm proud of you." Ethan sat back in his chair, a feeling of pride welling up inside him. His father had finally acknowledged his progress. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it meant everything to Ethan. For the first time, it felt like he was on the right path, and that path was his own. Naomi had shown him the way, but it was Ethan who had chosen to walk it. And as he sat at the dinner table, surrounded by his family, he knew that this was only the beginning. No longer would he be the boy who failed every test. He was someone who could rise above any challenge, as long as he kept pushing forward. Ethan had learned that the greatest power was not in wealth or status, but in believing in oneself and the quiet guidance of those who truly see us for who we are. Naomi had seen him, and in doing so, she had helped him see himself. And that made all the difference. Ethan sat in his study, his eyes scanning the pages of his math book. The numbers no longer looked like enemies. They seemed like old friends now, each problem a puzzle that he could solve. His confidence had grown tremendously over the past few weeks. No longer was he the boy who couldn't get a single math problem right. Now, he was the one teaching himself, the one who didn't need to rely on anyone but his own determination. He remembered the first day he had sat down with Naomi, her quiet encouragement changing the way he saw learning and the world around him. Ethan had worked hard to improve, and now, as the final exam approached, he felt ready. But as ready as he felt, there was still a part of him that doubted whether it was enough. He had spent his entire life living in the shadow of his father's expectations. No matter how much he accomplished, it never seemed to be enough. Richard Kessler was a man who measured success in terms of results, not effort. Ethan had learned that early on. As he looked at his exam papers, Ethan felt the familiar pressure begin to build in his chest. Would this be enough to prove to his father that he could succeed? Would he ever feel truly worthy of his father's praise? The weight of those thoughts pressed heavily on him as he made his way downstairs to dinner that evening. He knew his father would ask about his progress. He had to be ready, not just with the right answers, but with the right attitude. At the dinner table, Richard sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence filling the room. Ethan could feel his father's eyes on him as he took his seat, a quiet expectation hanging in the air. Richard cleared his throat. "So, Ethan," he began, "how's the math coming along? Are you finally going to pass this test?" Ethan looked at his father, his pulse quickening. He had worked so hard for this moment, but now that it was here, the words seemed to catch in his throat. "I've been doing well," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the anxiety building inside. "I'm ready for the exam." Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said curtly. "We'll see how well you do. Remember, it's not about trying. It's about succeeding. That's the only thing that matters in this world." Ethan nodded, a tightness forming in his chest. He had heard these words from his father countless times before, but this time, they didn't sting as much. He had learned something important over the past few weeks. He didn't need his father's validation to know that he had succeeded. He had already proven that to himself. Later that night, Ethan retreated to his room, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubts and hopes. He sat down at his desk, looking at the study materials in front of him, but something inside him had changed. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was working to meet someone else's expectations. He was working to meet his own. The following morning, Ethan woke up early, feeling a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that he had done everything he could to prepare for the test. It wasn't about perfection. It was about doing his best, and that was enough. As he walked into the exam room, Ethan felt the nerves starting to creep back in. But this time, he was ready. He sat down at the desk, picked up his pencil, and focused. Each question was no longer a mountain to climb. It was a challenge to solve, and he was ready to face it head-on. When the exam was over, Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had done his best. That was all he could ask for. Days later, the results came in. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his family, the envelope in front of him. He opened it slowly, his heart racing. The grades were written clearly on the paper. A solid passing grade. Nothing spectacular, but it was enough. Richard sat across from him, his gaze focused on the paper in Ethan's hands. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Richard spoke. "You did well, Ethan," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Not perfect, but enough. You've proven you can do it." Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. His father's approval was never easy to earn, but today, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had done it for himself. He had worked hard, learned, and persevered. That was something no one could take away from him. As Ethan looked across the table at Naomi, who was busy tidying up the dishes, he realized how much he owed her. She had believed in him when no one else had. She had given him the strength to believe in himself. Naomi had never asked for anything in return, but in helping him, she had changed his life forever. And for that, Ethan would be eternally grateful. Ethan stood at the window, looking out at the vast expanse of the estate that stretched out before him. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the manicured lawns and the sparkling pool. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. He had once felt lost in this house, like he was a small part of something far bigger than himself. But now, everything felt different. Now he had a sense of purpose. Now he knew who he was. Naomi's lessons had not only helped him pass his math exam, but they had taught him something far more valuable: to believe in himself, to see beyond the expectations placed upon him and focus on his own growth. As he thought back to the moments when he had been frustrated and ready to give up, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for Naomi. She had been his guide, his mentor, and had never asked for anything in return. She had seen something in him when no one else had. And now, as he stood there, he realized that it wasn't just about the grades, the success, or the approval. It was about the journey, the personal growth he had experienced because of Naomi's quiet strength and encouragement. His father, Richard, had been proud of him for passing the exam, but Ethan knew the real victory lay in what he had learned about himself. As he walked down the grand hallway of the mansion, Ethan heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind him. It was Naomi, her quiet presence still as comforting as ever. She had always been there in the background, watching, supporting, and guiding him without asking for any recognition. Ethan turned around, his eyes meeting hers. "Naomi," he began, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for everything you've done." Naomi raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a small smile. "There's no need to thank me," she said softly. "You did the hard work. I just showed you the way." Ethan shook his head, a small chuckle escaping him. "No, Naomi," he said. "You showed me something much more important. You showed me that I am capable. You helped me believe in myself when I couldn't." Naomi's smile widened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It was a look of quiet pride, one that spoke volumes more than any words ever could. "You always had it in you, Ethan," she replied gently. "I just helped you see it." Ethan stood there for a moment, taking in her words. It wasn't just the math that had changed him. It was the way Naomi had helped him change his perspective on life. She had made him see the value in hard work, persistence, and, most importantly, self-belief. And as much as he had gained from her, he realized he hadn't done enough to show her how much he appreciated her. He had spent so much time focusing on proving himself to others that he hadn't taken the time to show gratitude to the one person who had truly believed in him. "Naomi," Ethan began again, his voice more determined, "I want to make sure you know how much you mean to me. You're not just someone who helped me with my math. You've changed my life." Naomi looked at him, her expression softening. "Ethan, you're a good young man," she said quietly. "You've come a long way, and I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled, a sense of warmth spreading through him. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. As the days went on, Ethan continued to excel in his studies. He wasn't just doing it for his father or anyone else. He was doing it for himself. He had learned the value of perseverance and self-worth, and he knew that he had the ability to succeed in whatever he set his mind to. Naomi had taught him that. It wasn't just the math that had changed him. It was the belief in himself that he had gained, and it was that belief that would carry him through whatever challenges lay ahead. As he walked through the halls of his family's mansion, Ethan no longer felt like he was just the son of Richard Kessler. He was Ethan, someone who had proven to himself that with hard work, persistence, and belief in himself, anything was possible. And for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path, one that had been paved with the quiet wisdom of the woman who had always been there for him, Naomi. He had learned that the greatest strength wasn't in the approval of others, but in the ability to believe in yourself. Naomi had shown him that, and now, with every step he took, he carried that lesson with him. Ethan had changed in ways he never thought possible. His confidence had grown with every passing day, and as he sat at the desk in his room, staring at the homework before him, he felt more in control of his future than ever before. The lessons he had learned from Naomi were not just about math, they were about life. The patience, the perseverance, and the strength she had shown him had become a part of who he was now. It wasn't just about acing exams or meeting expectations. It was about the person he was becoming, a person who could face challenges with determination, a person who knew his own worth. He had done more than just learn math. He had learned how to believe in himself. His relationship with his father, Richard, had shifted too. Richard had always been the towering figure in Ethan's life, the one whose approval seemed like the ultimate goal. But over time, Ethan had come to understand that his self-worth wasn't defined by his father's expectations or approval. It was defined by his own actions, his own growth. Richard's praise for Ethan's improvement had been brief, but it had been enough. Ethan no longer sought his father's validation. What mattered now was how he saw himself. As Ethan continued to excel academically, his relationship with Naomi remained a cornerstone of his success. She had never expected anything in return for her help, yet every day she showed him that there was more to life than just status or wealth. Her kindness and her belief in him had been the spark that had ignited a fire in Ethan. One afternoon, after finishing his studies early, Ethan decided to do something he hadn't done before. He went to Naomi's quarters, a small room tucked away at the back of the mansion, where she spent her free time. As he knocked on the door, his heart beat a little faster. He wasn't sure what he would say, but he knew it was time to acknowledge her for everything she had done for him. When Naomi opened the door, she looked surprised to see him. "Ethan, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle as always. "Yes, everything's fine," Ethan replied. "I just wanted to talk for a minute." Naomi stepped aside and let him in. The room was simple but warm, with a few bookshelves and a small desk by the window. Ethan had never really paid much attention to her space before, but now he saw it in a different light. This was her sanctuary, the place where she could rest after long days of work. "I just wanted to say thank you," Ethan began, looking at Naomi. "I know I've said it before, but it doesn't feel like enough. You've done so much for me, more than anyone else ever has. You didn't have to help me, but you did. And because of that, I'm not the same person I was a few months ago." Naomi gave him a soft smile, her eyes warm and kind. "Ethan, I only did what I thought was right. You had it in you all along. You just needed to see it for yourself." Ethan nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had never truly understood how much Naomi's belief in him had meant until now. She wasn't just a maid in the house. She was the person who had shown him that true success wasn't measured by wealth or titles. It was measured by the way you carried yourself, the way you treated others, and the way you handled the challenges life threw at you. "I want to do something for you," Ethan said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've done so much for me, and I want to make sure you know how much I appreciate it. I know it's not much, but I'd like to help you in any way I can." Naomi shook her head, a small laugh escaping her. "Ethan, you don't need to do anything. The only thing you need to do is keep believing in yourself. That's all the reward I need." Ethan paused, looking at Naomi with a newfound respect. "I understand," he said, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "But still, I want to find a way to give back. You've changed my life, Naomi." Naomi's smile softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already done more than enough, Ethan. You're on the right path now. Just keep going, and everything else will follow." As Ethan left Naomi's room, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He knew that his journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, more tests to face, and more lessons to learn. But for the first time, he was ready. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was living his life on his terms, following his own path. And he knew that as long as he kept believing in himself, there was nothing he couldn't achieve. As he walked back to his room, he thought about the future, about what was next for him. He knew that with the lessons Naomi had taught him, he was prepared for whatever came his way. And in that moment, he realized that the true gift Naomi had given him wasn't just academic knowledge. It was the ability to see his own potential and the courage to pursue it. The journey was his now, and he was ready to take the next step. Ethan stood at the entrance of the grand mansion, staring out at the horizon. The world seemed vast, filled with endless possibilities, yet it also felt strangely small now that he had found his place in it. The mansion, once a symbol of the pressures and expectations he had always struggled to meet, had become a place of growth, a reflection of everything he had accomplished. It had been months since he first sat down with Naomi to tackle those impossible math problems, and so much had changed in that time. He was no longer the lost boy desperately trying to please his father. He was a young man who had learned to believe in himself, who had found strength in his own determination. But there was one thing that still lingered in the back of his mind. What would happen when he finally had to leave this house and step into the world on his own? The thought of facing the world without Naomi by his side was both exciting and daunting. He knew he had the skills now, but would the confidence stay with him when the stakes were higher? It was a question that had been brewing in his mind for days. Naomi had been a constant presence in his life, guiding him not just through math, but through the complexities of believing in his own abilities. But what if she wasn't there to catch him when he stumbled? As he walked through the mansion's halls, Ethan heard the familiar sound of Naomi's footsteps behind him. She had always moved quietly, but somehow, she had always managed to be exactly where he needed her. He stopped for a moment, turning to face her as she approached. "Naomi," he said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, and I'm not sure what comes next. I've learned so much from you, but I'm starting to realize that the world outside is going to be different. I'm not sure if I'm ready to take the next step without your guidance." Naomi looked at him, her expression calm, but there was a warmth in her eyes. She had always been the quiet one, but Ethan knew her better than anyone now. "Ethan, the world outside will always be different. But that's not a bad thing. It's a chance for you to apply what you've learned and continue to grow. You've come so far already, and I have no doubt that you're ready." Ethan shook his head, his mind still clouded with uncertainty. It's just, I don't know if I can do it without you. You've always been there, guiding me, showing me the way. What if I fail when it really matters? Naomi stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. Failure isn't something to fear. It's part of life. It's how we learn and grow. You've already proven to yourself that you can succeed, Ethan. What matters now is that you keep believing in yourself, even when the road gets tough. Ethan looked at Naomi, his heart filled with gratitude. She had been his teacher, his mentor, and most importantly, his guide through the dark moments of self-doubt. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He was ready. With Naomi's words echoing in his mind, Ethan took a deep breath and walked towards the door. He wasn't stepping into the unknown alone. He was taking the lessons he had learned, the confidence he had built, and the strength that Naomi had helped him find. He was ready to face whatever came next. As he stepped outside, the cool air of the evening wrapped around him, and for the first time in his life, he felt at peace with who he was. The world no longer felt like a series of obstacles he had to overcome. It felt like an opportunity, a chance to keep growing, keep learning, and keep believing. Naomi had given him more than just the tools to succeed academically. She had given him the belief that he could succeed in life. And that, more than anything, was what he would carry with him as he moved forward into the next chapter of his life. The mansion behind him, with all its wealth and expectations, no longer defined him. He was Ethan, someone who had learned to believe in himself, someone who was ready to take on the world. And no matter where his journey took him, he would always carry the lessons Naomi had taught him, that the greatest strength comes from within, and that with persistence, self-belief, and the courage to move forward, anything is possible. Ethan stood at the edge of the driveway, looking out over the vast property that had once felt so imposing. The grand mansion behind him, with its towering walls and high expectations, no longer held the same weight it had before. It had been a symbol of pressure, but now it was just a backdrop to the new chapter of his life. Naomi had shown him the way, but it was up to him to walk the path. As he stood there, the soft breeze brushing against his face, Ethan felt ready. He had made it through the toughest times, and now he was equipped with the strength and self-belief that would carry him forward. The lessons Naomi had taught him, patience, persistence, and the courage to believe in himself, were not just things he could use in school. They were the foundation for his entire life. It wasn't just about succeeding in math anymore. It was about succeeding in life, facing challenges head-on, and never doubting his ability to overcome them. He wasn't the same person who had struggled with every test. He was someone who had faced his fears, learned from them, and emerged stronger. Ethan knew that the future was uncertain, but for the first time, he didn't fear it. He had confidence in himself, and that was something no one could take away from him. Naomi had given him the tools to succeed, but it was his hard work and dedication that had made it possible. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more tests, more obstacles, and more moments of doubt. But Ethan was ready. He had learned that success wasn't about being perfect. It was about doing your best and pushing through the hard times. It was about staying true to yourself, even when the world around you tried to tell you who you should be. He turned away from the mansion and took a step toward the future. The path wasn't clear, but it didn't need to be. Ethan knew that as long as he kept moving forward, he would find his way. His heart was light, filled with hope and excitement for the journey ahead. As he walked down the driveway, he couldn't help but think of Naomi. She had been the one to help him find his way, to show him that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. She had never asked for anything in return, and yet, she had changed his life. Ethan knew that no matter where life took him, he would always carry the lessons Naomi had taught him. She had taught him that it was okay to fail, as long as you learned from it. She had shown him that success wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey, the people who helped you along the way, and the strength you found within yourself. And as Ethan took another step, moving further away from the mansion and into the world, he knew that Naomi's influence would always be with him. The road ahead would be his to make, and he was ready to face it, with courage, persistence, and the unwavering belief in himself that Naomi had helped him find. In this inspiring tale of perseverance and growth, Ethan's journey unfolds as he transforms from a young man struggling with self-doubt into someone who believes in his own abilities. With the quiet guidance of Naomi, A maid who sees potential in him where others see failure. Ethan learns valuable life lessons that extend beyond academic success. His story exemplifies the power of persistence, self-belief, and the importance of those who quietly support and shape our lives. Naomi's influence on Ethan teaches him that true success comes not from meeting the expectations of others, but from pushing forward and believing in oneself. This is one of those Black stories that goes beyond simple achievements and digs deep into the complexities of personal growth. It highlights the power of education, the importance of role models, and how sometimes the most impactful people in our lives come from the most unexpected places. Through the challenges Ethan faces and the wisdom Naomi shares, we see that no matter the obstacles, it is possible to rise, learn, and succeed. These Black stories are filled with powerful lessons, showing that everyone has the capacity for greatness if they are given the opportunity to believe in themselves. As Ethan steps into the world, ready to face new challenges, we are reminded of the strength that comes from within and the lasting impact that one person's belief can have on another's life.